for this GNF session that, as you see in front of you, will deal with the need of a solid SME base within the industrial chain on space and defense program. You will have today both presentations that will start after the opening by Marco Fuchs, and after that we will have a panel that will sit here in front of you and that will reply to a number of questions on this topic. Who better than Marco Fuchs can introduce a session on the SMEs. Marco, your family has transformed a small company of 6 people that were working in a garage here in Bremen in '81 that has been transformed into one of the large system integrators of Europe with today, I think, something like 2,400 employees. And I'm sure that it will be a pleasure for us all to share this experience with you. Also, Marco, you are from Bremen, so you are at home here, and you are well known as an ambassador of your city. So I think really you are the best to give the introduction. Marco, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Yeah, Eric, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. And of course, it's a big pleasure for me here at IAC in Bremen, again, IAC in Bremen, I must say, after 2003, when we had it for the first time, to address you. And of course, the topic is a topic that I really like to talk about, because you're right, Eric, when OHB started 36, 37 years ago. Of course, we were the typical SME at that time. At that time, it was not the term startup. It was, in Germany, you would say, selbstständig machen, to be independent, to form your own company. But of course, the starting point that my parents had in the 80s were very similar to what now, of course, many SMEs are facing, and of course what every startup is facing. So I think that if you look back at the history of OHB, of course the support of space agencies, mainly of course predominantly ESA, but also DLR, was very, very instrumental in the success that OHB achieved over the last decades. SME, in the beginning, we carefully looked to SME status as OHB because there were some benefits attached to it. So you do have better access to certain situations. And I must confess, when we lost that status, because at one point, even ESA adopted the official SME rules of the Union, European Union, because before there was a period where it was more vague, what is an SME and how do you count as an SME? And then there were these firm rules from the European Union, which says basically you should not have more than, I think, 50 million in revenues or whatever it was at that time, or 250 employees. And of course, over the years, we have become accommodated to that as OHB. And I can say that the key point of OHB, why we have been able to be so successful, was the reality that space has always become more important and more useful. So the bottom line of the success story of OHB is that we were lucky to be in the right industry, because the space industry has started in the 80s at a very different level than what we all think about now and what we all have in mind. When we talk about commercialization now, we're talking at a very mature status. And of course, the growth in the industry, and especially also, of course, at OHB, has always been attached to trying to provide value. That has been very successful in a number of cases. So there are many examples of companies all over Europe that have been able over the last decades to draw that line. I'm very happy to address you here from a German perspective, from a Bremen perspective, of course, because as OHB we are always very proud of being part of the German space community, and Bremen has been able, and I think we all witness it these days, has been able to put itself really strongly on the map of the European industry. I think when you look at the roles SME play in the space industry, I can imagine that some of the SMEs currently being involved in space programs, of course, feel that it's very difficult to get the right attention, to get the right share, and of course, the regulatory environment for SMEs is in ESA contracts, so that you need to have the right share of G-return available. Of course, that is very different from large ESA states, where you do typically have the prime contractors or very large core team partners located in ESA programs, than from non-prime countries, where of course the SME situation is a bit different. But ESA has recognized that, and in the new procurement rules that we are now, actually tomorrow we're signing with Plato for the first time into contract. I wouldn't call it the full consortium scenario, the ultimate full consortium scenario, but I think a big step in that way. We do have also provisions for SME involvement in the large member states. So I do think that the procurement policies that ESA is following provide a very positive environment also for SMEs in big states, in small states. I can only assure you that it has not been easy 30 years ago, and I'm sure it's not easy now to develop a small company. The key thing of smaller companies, obviously, and actually that's big companies always the same, is to guarantee and safeguard a sufficient cash flow, because you need to make sure you get the money when you have to make payments at month end, when you have to make payroll at month end. This also is something that I think in the current rules with direct payments from ESA has been handled in a quite positive way. So I can only say I'm very proud and happy to stand here as an example of a positive, successful SME development that we had over the last decades. And again, I think it has to do a lot to do with the fact of the usefulness of space as such. Space industry has developed enormously. It has also to do with the support of organizations that always value competition. I think this has been something that SMEs, of course, naturally bring to the table. They understand that they have to be competitive. They understand at the end it's the quality of the product. And that's something I think if you keep that as a DNA, if you keep that as a strategy, that at the end, whatever the politics are, if your product is good, you have a good chance. And but the product has to be good to have a good chance long term. Then you will, of course, be able to succeed. It's not always the good idea to be a big company. So I see that OHB might not be an example for everybody, because we have followed the path of growing into a large system integrator. That had to do with opportunities at the moment. Of course, we did have opportunities, for example, with our military program, Saarlupe, some 18 years ago, that opened up. And of course, we had the opportunities with a number of larger ESA or ESA EU programs like the Galileo project, where we simply had opportunities. And the conclusion from these situations is sometimes it's better to take the risk of going alone and being competitive than to spend the time on negotiating work share with others. Sometimes it's better to focus on a risky path where you win or lose, but you learn the most of the contract situations where you lose. Then you can improve for the future. So I'm very happy to welcome you here on stage, and I'm very interested to see the discussion. I can only say from my experience that ESA is providing a broad platform for SMEs in all different areas of activity to flourish and to be successful. And again, Eric, thanks for inviting me to open that panel. I wish you all and wish us all a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Yes, also for me, a very good afternoon. We've just learned and we just had a very interesting and inspiring presentation or opening address by Marco. Thank you, Marco, for your availability and your willingness to introduce the topic of today, which you have seen on the screen. I think it's important to say that the views of the three main stakeholders will be nicely represented today, which is the public sector, the primes, and the SMEs. And so you will have presentations, and there will be a following discussion with the panel. Important issues will be addressed relating to the present and in particular to the future role of these three stakeholders. And we are very pleased that this topic is introduced for the first time at the IAC, and we are hopeful and confident that it will receive a permanent place at future IOC conferences. We have a very busy 1.5-hour GNF session in front of us, so I will not make a very long introduction. As Erik already said, we will have two parts. First, a part with three presentations by a South African and a US SME, and then presentation by ISA on the SME policy and what has ISA implemented so far to support SMEs. And the second one will be a panel discussion on the topic of the SMEs as seen by two representatives from the three parties involved, the public sector, two from the primes and two from the SMEs. So we are hopeful that this session will give you an interesting insight into this topic. So let's start quickly because we are already a little bit behind the schedule. You will see the names of the presenters on the screen and their affiliations. And it will be a 7 minutes type of elevator speech. So I think, let's see, we should all get into the elevator, open the doors, and invite Luca from ISA to make the first presentation. Luca, the lectern is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this kind introduction and invitation. It's actually a pleasure and an honor to talk about SME and what ISA is doing in this respect after the introduction by Herr Fuchs, because I think that it's really, we have to take into account the role of institutions first and what we have done in the past, but more important, what we are going to do in the future. And why this is so important? Because, I mean, the space sector, you all know, is living in extraordinary times, and all these changes, this revolution are occurring at a much faster than anticipated pace, I must say. And the new space race is on, and this is under the eyes of everybody, because we are not talking about the traditional elements of political or strategic or military interests. Here, the new competition is how to get the maximum profits, how to get the maximum return on the investment, what is the economic return of these activities. So this race, obviously, as you understand, is attracting a huge number of new entrants from different institutions. Now we have every year new countries that are entering and becoming spacefaring actors, and this is bringing together a lot of companies from space and non-space that are entering into this very crowded space arena. Now, this is bringing, of course, new cultures, new technologies, disruptive technologies, but is bringing, first and foremost, fierce competition worldwide. And you know, the only way to respond to competition is innovation, is to create value and innovation. So now this is one of the key features that we recognize into SMEs, is the capability of being flexible, to adapt, to react, to respond with a lot of efficiency. Now, and to inject innovation. It's our responsibility as public actors now, as any other institution, and ISA is not different from them, to create value and to create and sustain a new generation of entrepreneurs, to create a vibrant and sustainable ecosystem of SME in Europe. And this is very important for us for three specific axes. The first one is because we want to support the success of our ISA mission by injecting efficiency and innovation through the SMEs. But it's important for second axis, our member states, that they really want to have a sustainable industrial basis that is fully integrated in the supply chain of our large-scale integrator. And third is obviously for industry itself. So the third actor is that because we want to bring a solution and an answer to the traditional issues that are faced by industry. And let's start by providing you some elements, some figures, let's say, because it's always good to start with some numbers. Here it is the latest figures that we have. So this means that in our database we have more or less 900 SMEs that represent roughly a quarter of all the companies that are contracted by ISA in the period 2013-2017. So of this quarter of companies, anyway, they represent only 6% of the total commitments of the edges in that period. And that 60%, this 6% is even to be looked in a much closer under, let's say, the magnifiers, because honestly, it just they represent SMEs 4% when it comes of spacecraft development contracts, and 11% when this is technology. Now, these figures, as you see, the 1 quarter more or less reflects the distribution, the average distribution of SMEs in Europe. So this is absolutely in agreement, let's say, with our figures. But these figures are also telling us a story of Valley of Death that is very well known to everybody, in the sense that these big values on technology, but then the commitments suddenly evaporates when it comes to taking major responsibilities in system integration level. So how to reply? What are the things that ISA is trying to set in place, and has been doing that already now since a number of years, but we are making more and more progress. First and foremost, we have created a single point of contracts, an entry point for SMEs. As you understand, an SME usually is a small company, so they do not have enough resources to navigate in a complex organization as ISA can be, with such a big number of interfaces. So creating a single point of entry has been seen by SMEs as a big improvement. And here we have in the first row sitting our colleagues that manages on a daily basis the SME office. But this SME office is also in charge of organizing a number, or setting in place a number of measures that have been agreed by our member states to support these companies. First and foremost is training, because we can support SMEs by training them and reinforcing the technical understanding, and bringing them up to a level that is that puts them in the position to be fully integrated in the supply chain. And the second part is networking, because another important thing is that if an SME is generating innovation, then this innovation needs to be taken up by the large-scale integrators. So the LSI and the subsystem leaders needs to be aware of what's happening. So what we are doing here is to create this kind of B2B opportunity for networking among SMEs and between SMEs and the large-scale integrators. And here I will provide you some figures about that in the next slide. Of course, then we are also discussing with our member states how to make ISA a more attractive place for SMEs, also when it comes to procurement, as our folks mentioned before. So we have providing special measures to encourage and to allocate a dedicated part of our procurement just for SMEs. And we know that this is a very important element, financial measures. Of course, we know that an SME may have treasury problems, so this is what we are trying now to address. And here we have some figures. I mean, since December last year, we have introduced that a measure that when an SME is acting as prime or a subco is entitled to an automatic advance payment of 35%. This has been saluted as a very important measure to support the sustainability and the viability, financial viability of our companies. But it is just one of the measures that we are setting in place. space, and I'm sure that my colleagues will elaborate more during the panel discussion. Of course, when it comes to networking, needless to say that it was a big success. Just a few days ago, we had 1,400 participants to the Industry Space Day, a very successful edition, I think the largest of this case, that took place in ESTEC, and brought together representatives from LSIs, from 400 SMEs from all over Europe. So there were 11,000 pre-arranged B2B meetings. That was really impressive for 2 days. It was a huge crowd and very, very helpful to support companies. But this is not the end of the story. Of course, for the increased attention to the viability of SMEs, we are also now trying to exploit as much as possible the finance resources that are available also in big finance institutes, like, for instance, the European Investment Bank. And with my colleagues, we are trying to establish a cooperation, to test some cooperation mode, trying to convey the support and the resources that are available and still largely untapped at the European Investment Bank level, and to make them available for all our SMEs. So stay tuned, because the story is not over at all. We have a lot of things ongoing, and if you want to be in touch with us, here are some of the contacts, so visit us. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Luca. The next presenter is Leo Loicano, let's say from Velcro Engineering Corporation. Leo is the Senior Director, Program Management Value Stream, Lead Aerospace Group. Leo, the floor is yours.
Okay, so as stated, my name is Leo Loicano, Senior Director of Program Management and Aerospace Value Stream Lead. I'm with Velcro Engineering Corporation. We are in Springfield, New Jersey. Okay, just a few words about Velcro. So what do? So we design, analyze, and produce fluid controls and systems for critical, high-demanding applications. So basically, fluid controls are our specialty. We are located just near New York City, about a 30-minute drive from there. The markets we serve are aerospace, nuclear, and industrial. So we're a small business. We've been in business since 1951. Original founders still own the company. We are privately held. They are not involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, so we have a professionally managed organization. We're 300 people, one location, and very strong engineering, about 60 engineers. Space market represents just over 25% of our business, military another quarter, and you can see the balance there. We're also in the commercial military aircraft, nuclear, and industrial. Just a few words about the products we supply. It's all engineered items. They're all our designs, but primarily we are solenoid valves and mechanical types of valves. You can see some samples there on the screen. And basically, again, military and commercial and space products that we've been supplying for many, many years. Some of the programs that we support specifically for space and military. So we're on launch vehicles, manned space systems, space station resupply, military aircraft, helicopters, unmanned aerial vehicles, and satellites as well. So one of our mottos is long-term production. You know, developing something for a satellite is great, but the production is quantity one. You know, it's not very advantageous versus a military aircraft or, for example, space launch, where they're launching every month. And if you have multiple products there, that's a very good business case. So I was asked to look at the top 3 priorities for programs. So first priority, basically stable programs. We want to be on contracts that are well-funded, ideally with leading industry companies such as Lockheed or Boeing, for example, on SLS, where we work. Ideally also backed by major customers such as NASA, ESA, or United States Air Force, for example, for military aircraft, or the Navy. Some of those programs get funded each quarter, and that could be very unstable for a small company because you may have a 3-year contract that every quarter they decide if they're going to give you the money or not, and that can be very unstable for us. Sometimes we do work with startups. We've done that over many years. High risk, high reward. You may get high content, you may get good margins, but the funding may not be stable. There may be some billionaire behind it, or there may be some venture capitalist or something, and all of a sudden they want to do something else with their money. So that could be unstable, and that could be risky. And if problems arise, they're not Lockheed, they're not Boeing, so they may have very limited resources. But if you don't play in these markets, that's also a risk. You have to kind of balance it all throughout. Second, we want well-defined requirements. Sometimes we may win a contract, customer doesn't know what they want. Their specifications are not mature, or you're designing a product to a predictable schedule if you have a good specification that is solid. You want to try to minimize those redesigns so you could use your resources efficiently. Some customers have ongoing changes. When you have that, of course, then there's higher cost, schedule delays. Some systems are immature. If the customer doesn't know what they want, you could, of course, end up with delays or cancellations, and now you've just invested all your resources in something that's not fruitful to you. Third priority, so long-term production. So as a business that's been in business for 60+ years, we really try to get those contracts which don't have just 1 or 2 years of production, but maybe have 10, 20, 30 years of production. And that's fantastic because it keeps our factory full, good steady production, monthly shipments. Ideally you have profitable programs. It doesn't do you any good to get something where I'm losing money on every contract. And high quantity, ideally. If I'm shipping every month and I have multiple units on that vehicle, that's very advantageous to us. We want a predictable forecast. Again, if you have a NASA or an Air Force customer, they're buying so many missions, versus in the commercial market, it may be less stable. We want to be able to have the right staff in place and invest in our facility. Again, as a small company, you do have limited resources. Where am I going to spend that money? Spend it where there are good contracts in place. And finally, strong market demand and future growth. I have a picture there of the CH-53K, which is a Sikorsky Lockheed program. That's a contract we worked on about 10 years ago. It's got 20 years of production in front of it, between the domestic market and international market as well. Excellent program for us. We invested in it, and we're hoping that Lockheed and Sikorsky are successful in selling that helicopter and continuing with that. Okay, so with 3 actions, I was asked to look at what actions as a small business would I give to the public sector, the primes, and as a small business, what should I take? So to the public sector, my comment would be properly fund those programs to completion. Dangling that money every quarter is very unstable, makes us very uncomfortable. If it's a 2, 3-year contract, please try to fund that right all the way through so that we can meet our requirements. To the primes, what I would say is provide clear requirements. Make sure you have the proper staff in place. Questions do arise, and when they do, please give us timely resolution of open issues so we don't have open-ended contracts where you may spend 2 or 3 years instead of just 1 year trying to resolve something. And finally, as a small business, we need to continue investing in our own products. We have to be careful because we get these 10, 20-year contracts. We get very comfortable. We're making the same thing over and over. Well, guess what? 10, 20 years from now, you're irrelevant. So you need to continue the R&D, invest within your company, and basically have that next generation product available for when the customer comes out for it. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo. Our next speaker is Dr. Sias Mostert. He is the Executive Chairman of the Space Commercial Services Group, South Africa, so we move to the other side of the equator. Sias, it's yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of our experiences as a small to medium-sized company in South Africa. And we have been in this transition from small to medium for the last year or so I can also reflect on some of the questions we're trying to answer definitively. So we were founded 10 years ago to focus on the missing links in the space value chain in relation to emerging space programs. And because we have lived it ourselves in the context of South Africa, we understand some of the realities of the challenges. So we organize ourselves in 4 activities. First of all, we have a group which focuses on investment and commercialization activities, and today that's mostly related around commercial constellations. Then we have a space advisory company which is focused around design and consulting. So we form joint teams with our customers and make sure that all the bases are covered for reliable space programs in emerging countries. Then we have New Space Systems. They are focusing on manufacturing components, and this has really been a great area of growth given the commercial constellations and the change in the market architecture. And then we have SES Space, which is our local program management AIT system integration function. So we have split these 4 functions into 4 different entities, because what I found in a previous company called Sunspace, where I was, is as long as you focus at the system level, everything else plays second fiddle to the prime goal of getting the next big satellite. But there are lots of other building blocks in a typical space value chain that requires attention. So this is how we created Space Commercial Services 10 years ago. At the time it was an oxymoron. Today I think it is very much the in vogue way of looking at space. But what we find today when we make the transition from small to medium is that if we get our sense of identity confused, then the people in each of these different areas don't know how to interface with the market. So at the group level, we're really at the tier 0 level. We speak to investors who want to invest in new constellations. SES Space really is a mini prime, if you like, providing complete spacecraft. New Space is very well positioned at tier 2, so it deals with many of the major commercial constellations. I think I can claim that we are the biggest magneto-talker manufacturer in the world, because we supply the magneto-talkers to the OneWeb constellation as one. And then Space Advisory Company is really also at a tier 2, although it provides the backbone of our intellectual capital across all the different tiers. So what we have learned from our side, the transition from small to medium, is you must choose your supply chain position very carefully. So it's very easy to interface to the rest of the supply chain. But each of these supply chain roles requires a different business model, a different capital structure, which we're busy navigating at the moment, and how success is defined for each of the management teams is also very critical. And then we have this constant battle around decentralization and centralization. In fact, next week we have a strategic session exactly around this. But the key thing here is critical mass. You must make sure that all the fundamental roles to be successful in business are properly staffed. And then this question about what is our value proposition to prime. So in South Africa, we prime to the NEL, which has the contract is now currently stalled for the South African National Space Satellite Mission. But what I find is that because we are focusing on a few areas, we can do some of the things much better than they can. And that's, in my view, the core value proposition of being a small to medium-sized enterprise. Lessons learned, well, from our experience to the public sector, please keep the scope. I mean, it's exactly the same that the previous speaker said, and pay on time. That's absolutely critical. I love the ESA mechanisms for sorting out this particular problem around treasury. In relation to prime contractors, also front load the cash flow. Make sure that the SME is focused on the technical work and not on cash flow management all the time. And what can SMEs do themselves? Well, to be more successful, they need to focus, because you have 45 or 50 engineers who are all really good and clever and can master most problems in the world and in the universe. You need to apply your mind to those that can be profitably and cash flow-wise implemented. In terms of recommendation to SMEs themselves, well, in the public sector, what we found is that understanding the public good goals is as important as any of the other requirements which may be written down in a specific contract. In terms of prime contractors, we've become indispensable partners to those that we work with, and we focus on realizing the innovation goals that make sure that our offer to the prime contractor stays fresh over a decade or 20 years term. And then what can an SME do to convert from small to medium? Well, first of all, focus on a niche, and then be clear on your identity that you want to represent in the market, so that people know exactly who they interface with in terms of the value proposition that is realized for them. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you, Sias. So we go now to the next part of our GNF session, that's the panel discussion, and I would kindly invite the people which are shown here on the list, that's on the screen, to come up to the podium for the questions. Morel, the Director of Industry Procurement and Legal Services. We have Ernst Pfeiffer, which is the President of the German SME Association. We've got Nicolas Chamozy, the Executive Vice President of Space Systems for Airbus. Thibaut Delourme, Copernicus Team Leader, Space Data and Societal Challenges and Growth. And we have Matt Tetlow, an Australian SME, the CEO function, and finally Lisa Callahan, Vice President and General Manager, Civil Space. So let's start with the questions, and I think that the first question will be to Erik. Erik, all large space programs that ESA is conducting are contracted to LSIs. Then the question is, does ESA really care about SMEs?
Well, Peter, after what we have presented about what Luca Del Monte has presented about the policies of ESA, I think we have convinced the audience that we care about SMEs. But let's go to a few facts. We have recently awarded the Plato satellite that Marco remembers that this satellite will help us to discover exoplanets. But if you take this program, we have so far selected 17 subcontractors for Plato. After the 17, 12 of those 17 are European SMEs. But more important, when you look at what they are developing, I would just take one example. The company Space System Finland, for example, is providing us with the spacecraft control software subsystem, which is an essential element of the satellite. This is bringing me to the role of the SMEs in ESA programs. The atomic clock in the Galileo satellites is produced by European SMEs. Without those clocks, the Galileo satellite would not, the system would not exist. I take another example from Ireland. The company Inalabs from Ireland that has been developed very recently is working for us on the gyros, the 3-axis gyros of the next generation for the scientific missions of tomorrow. This is showing what SMEs are bringing really to the space programs of ESA. So yes, we care about SME, but we don't only care. I think we need SMEs. We need SMEs, of course, for the products they are providing to us, the technology, for their efficiency. But also, we need SMEs because this is the policy of our 22 member states. It is also the policy of the European Union to benefit from the growth and the economic benefits that are generated by SMEs. And we are working for them. We have built around the years a procurement system in ESA that is flexible enough to tailor with that kind of policies that all member states and the European Union wants to implement, Peter.
Thank you, Erik. So you've expressed that a lot of things have been done. Could you highlight a little bit what is still in the make to be done by ESA for the SMEs, shortly?
Well, I don't want to repeat what was already said, but let's say there are 4 points I would like to underline. The first one, and this was underlined by all the two SMEs that have made the presentation a minute ago, the financial aspects. So it is very clear we are presently changing our policy. This was said by Luca Del Monte. I would like to underline this. We have increased the down payment at contract signature up to 35% of the contract value. But more important, we are allowing SMEs to offset this advance payment at the last 2 payment milestones, meaning that they keep, throughout the execution of the contract, the neutral cash flow that is needed. Also, in order to allow SMEs to start working immediately without waiting for the signature of the contract, which can always take a little time, we are providing them now with invoiceable preliminary authorization to proceed, allowing them immediately, even before signature of the contract, to start working with those, what we call the PATP, preliminary authorization to proceed. That is on the financial side. Then on the visibility. You have seen the chart on the ISD. Do you know that during the ISD we have organized more than 11,000 face-to-face meetings? This is incredible in 2 days, and this has allowed, for example, one SME with 1 trip to ESTEC to have as many talks with the prime contractors or other companies to team up. We have the matchmaking tool also that will support them in this. An important point also, we are working that is not easy in ESA to have a unique gateway for the announcement of opportunities that will allow SMEs to save time and to have an easy life. We have a ministerial meeting next year in December that is 2019 plus, and that will be the occasion also to propose missions, instruments and missions that would fit with SMEs' capacities. We are working on it.
Very good. Let's say, you mentioned what ESA has done as an institutional customer. Perhaps the second question to Ernst is, there are many institutional parties which have policies. From your perspective, what have been the strong and the weak points of these policies so far?
Actually, I see no weak points of SME policies. I see only strong points of SME policies, and when I see the talk or the speech of Eric and from Luca, the presentation, very nice, and I see a very good development in the right direction. And I must acknowledge Eric and the whole team that really in the past 12 months there have been a big change and understanding on ESA side and on other levels. And you have implemented several nice measures. Luca mentioned it, you mentioned it, the prepayment, the minimum involvement in space missions is one of the central things. And the subcontract, one subcontract. We don't have legal stuff in our companies. So, and what is also very nice and shows the understanding in the Plato contract with OHB. So you have managed together with OHB to implement these measures already in OHB, in the Plato mission. The space days of recently at ESA, they presented already the measures. And this is speed. This is also part of new space and chapeau. And in some years, we will see, hopefully, that these measures have the fruits. Of course, SME in prime countries have a little bit more difficulty. So in Germany, UK, France, and Italy, where we have the primes, the share for SME is a little bit difficult to achieve, but I'm optimistic. So the strongest policy which you can implement is enabling a flight contract. Once we have a flight contract, we have the flight heritage, and following that is a commercial contract, and so we can have a very big leverage with such institutional missions. We need a sustainable, healthy space ecosystem, which means a nice distribution of companies, institutes, large ones, small ones, like in a jungle. And you have all the possibilities to create this together with the politicians. Of course, there are some important missing points yet, which should be implemented. For me, the most important ones, we need a quicker implementation of new technology projects. So something, a target of 4 months between first contact to ESA and until the contract for co-funded projects, for example. We need more budget for technology programs. This is not the duty of ESA. This is the message to the politicians who distribute the money in the ministerial conference. So technology programs are the source of innovation. We need also small missions where SMEs of all countries can participate. We need financing measures. One have been implemented, but we need also easy access to loans and credits for co-funded activities. We need also a larger SME office at ESA. And one point has been mentioned already by one of the speakers, a stable program. A stable program enables us safer investments.
Now, within the German context, there has been a strong SME policy has been established. How do you think, what was the key for your success? And is this a recipe which can be exported, you think?
Indeed, in Germany, we have a very good SME landscape. We have a relatively high percentage of SME compared to the large companies. And I think our politicians, they have realized that also in space business, SME are very important. Then we have the Space Agency, the National Space Agency. They, since many, many years, or always, they understood the importance, and they don't give up to talk to Eric and say, Eric, now we have to do something. So you need the support of these people from the Space Agency, DLR. So without the understanding of all these entities, including the politicians, they must also to understand. I think this was a recipe to get into this stage that we can see these nice measures ESA has presented. But not only Germany has understood. For example, Switzerland, they have implemented, or they dedicate 30% of their budget in Plato for SME. It's the right step, and the next countries will follow. So the two things are, you must group together, also in other countries, to SME association. We in Germany, we have one group. We have also the SME for space with the lead of Hans. I guess he's somewhere here in the, yeah. Hans is there. So let's group together, and then let's talk with one harmonized opinion directly between the SME associations and politicians, agencies.
Okay, thank you, Ernst. We've listened from the point of view from the public, from the SMEs, and let's now for the primes. Nicola, the space programs run by Airbus. What can these SMEs bring which you don't have in-house?
Okay. First of all, I have a comment for Eric. As much as a neutral cash flow is necessary for the SMEs, it is also necessary for the big groups. And I speak under control of Lisa and Marco sitting in the front row. So don't forget it sometimes. Just a second remark on SMEs. Yes, we are talking about this small independent legal entity with only a few bunch of people. We should not forget, nevertheless, that we do have also somehow internal SMEs in a big organization. I talk about smart, innovative, agile entities that sometimes we do not even know the existence of, and that are absolutely brilliant and working on extremely innovative solutions. Maybe you know this quote of the former CEO of Siemens, where he said, if Siemens would only know what Siemens knows, means that there are plenty of golden nuggets all over the place. And third, we do have also investment vehicle within Airbus where we do invest in SMEs. Does not mean that we are necessarily working with them, but we have access to this one. Now, this being said, why do we work with SMEs, and what are the SMEs bringing that we cannot find in-house? So first of all, sometimes we work for SMEs because we are forced to do so. I mean, just to be as blunt as this. I mean, you said it, Eric. You said it, Ernst. It's on ESA rules. It's sometimes. I mean, in Germany we have a rule. In France we have a rule like this one. Now, this cannot be the only reason, of course. I mean, it was more joke than anything else. There are some technologies that can only be developed with an extremely high level of expertise in very narrow fields of expertise where big groups cannot afford to invest too much and just to have dedicated teams working on very specific technologies, where it will be nonsensical to develop within LSI. By the way, it's not only true for space activities, it's also true for any type of industry. Now, the third thing, I think it was mentioned a bit earlier also, SMEs and startups can support us also in bringing the agility that sometimes, it's an understatement, sometimes we miss. And speed, we need to answer when we need to answer new space requirements. Thanks to their size, thanks to their focus, and possibly the chance that they have to experiment more freely than we have the possibility to do it. For us, and for those who know it, the typical case is OneWeb, or OneWeb subsidiary, the joint venture that we have with OneWeb. It's part of Airbus, but it's outside of Airbus. It still is a startup or SME, and they do things much quicker than we could do. It does not mean that they do it better, they do it different, and it's also extremely important for us. Now, to give you a bit more precise information and following on what Ernst just said, saying that in big prime countries there are less SMEs in the space domain, just to give you one or two examples. We do have, for example, an SME in France, which we have developed over years together on their silicon carbide capabilities. It's a company called Boostech, which is well known. And it allowed us not only to develop the mirrors, the various M1, M2, M3 mirrors, whatever the configuration is, but also the structure of the instrument, which is a key. It's absolutely key performance when we're talking about extremely high-resolution satellites, optical instruments, large telescope like Herschel, like Euclid, like the Osiris navigation camera on Rosetta. This is something that we have consciously decided not to insource, but to develop in a very agile, small company where, frankly speaking, we benefit on a day-to-day basis, and you see whatever we are developing in terms of extremely high-resolution satellites, both for national programs, European programs on the export market. The second one, not to talk about only in France, Euroheat pipes in Belgium, where we have developed, again, on a long-term basis, extremely high-performance heat loop pipes for the benefit of telecom and Earth observation satellites. Another one, IX Blue for the fiber optic gyros. Extremely sophisticated solution that we are using for own purposes, but they are also sold on the external market. And I could go on the list like this. But you see, there are one characteristic is that they are extremely focused on one solution. They are focusing their efforts, as all of you said so far, and it's a long-term discussion. It's a long-term partnership. We are not just selecting one SME, use it for one program, go to the other. This does not work.
Okay. Thank you. Let's say you mentioned OneWeb. Let's say that is a change from the one-off programs to the evolution to series production. Very shortly, do you see there an increasing role for the SMEs in this context?
I think it's a change. It's a change of the way we interface with the suppliers and SMEs in this case. I think what it changed, first of all, it forced us to work more in a collaborative development mode than in a traditional requirement spec and the V model. I mean, we had extremely short V models development cycle, both internally, by the way, and externally. Always take the example of the onboard computer. The first version of the onboard computer was delivered less than 3 months after we started the program. It was not a real, let's say, well-packaged onboard computer. It was kind of a breadboard with you had cables all over the place, but could not care less. Just it was delivered to the prime level. Onboard software, at least the V0 version, was loaded. It didn't work. They tweaked it a bit. 3 weeks later, we received a second onboard computer. It was a bit better, not the ultimate solution, and so forth and so forth. It was extremely small cycles. The second remark is probably on OneWeb. The change, it's both for SMEs we are working with and ourselves, is given the number of equipments that we'll manufacture, given the fact that we could eventually deliver 4 satellites per day, means 8 solar panels, 8 star sensors. Last year, we collectively procured probably 20 SARS sensors. Here we are talking about 8 per day. So it means that you have to adapt your industrial scheme. It means for the SME to change their way of working. For us also, there are some, I was referring to the onboard computer. In the good old times, we would have developed the onboard computers internally and send it for manufacture in our equipment facility, which we are not doing in this case. We're developing it ourselves, and it's offloaded to SME for mass production. And an SME which does not come from the space sector, comes from the automotive industry, we have two in fact, automotive industry and missile industry, which are a bit more used to, not to say large series, but at least medium-sized series, which we are not used to. So this requires also for the SMEs, for the SME environment we are working with, also to adapt, because they were used to manufacture one equipment, to develop manufacture one equipment. Here we are significantly changing scale.
Okay, thank you. Let's say all the questions which you addressed so far were dealing with the upstream. Now we go to Thibaut Delorme, let's say on the development of the downstream, let's say, which is one of the key objectives of the Copernicus program. Within this program, what is the added value, Thibaut, of the SMEs, and what can they do which others cannot?
Okay. Let me thank, first of all, Eric for inviting the European Commission here. It's always a pleasure to participate with ISA. I apologize for my Deputy Director General, Pierre Delso, who could not make it today, and he asked me to represent him here. I started my job 3 years ago, and my boss told me that my objective was to make sure that the benefits of Copernicus are brought to as many users as possible, and to as many citizens as possible. And I immediately made the assumption that most of the Copernicus data could not be used by our end users directly. By end users, I mean, for instance, fishermen, firefighters, or coast guards. These people cannot use Copernicus data directly because you need to have some expertise in the monitoring of remote sensing data because before you can actually make use of it. And therefore, SMEs are absolutely essential here because these people have the ability to use Copernicus data and to develop applications based on Copernicus data and to make it available to the end users in the end. And that layer of SMEs, as well as large companies or public organizations who are always developing applications based on Copernicus, this layer is absolutely essential. And in the end, we believe that this assumption was the right one to make because out of the companies that use Copernicus already, more than 99% of them are SMEs. And that's because they have the right agility, they have the right creativity, they have the right business drive to really seize the opportunity of Copernicus data and to develop applications based on that. Let me just give you one example. It's a German company that is called Building Radar. It's a startup based in Bavaria. They're using Copernicus data to monitor all the construction sites in the planet. And thanks to that information, they're actually able to locate where the construction sites are and to send and sell this information to construction companies to tell them that they might have interesting clients in that area. So of course, it's a very, very, very valuable information to have. And this application is something we never thought of when creating Copernicus at the beginning. It's something completely new, very innovative, and that demonstrates, I think, the importance of having very agile SMEs, being creative, and bringing our data to a lot of new users.
Okay, very good. We're running a little bit late, but perhaps you can give us a quick answer, Thibaut, on your experience. Which measures have worked from the EU perspective for SMEs, and which ones have not worked fully or have not worked at all?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we've tried many different instruments since I've arrived, and I think we've essentially learned 2 lessons. The first lesson is that if you want to work with SMEs and startup, you need to keep it simple and fast. So SMEs don't have the time to spend a full month replying to an application form of 50 pages. They don't have the legal or the administrative capability to make extensive reporting on all their costs and everything that they're doing. And they cannot wait as long as 1 year to get a reply on whether they'll get the funding or not. And therefore, you need to make it very simple, very fast, and very flexible in the way you allocate your support to SMEs. For instance, let me just give you an example of the Copernicus incubation program, which we set up a couple of years ago. And here, the startups can apply anytime throughout the year. The call is permanently open. The application form is only 2 pages, and then they can submit a video pitch, which they can take with their smartphone, and that's sufficient as an application. And they receive the reply, whether we will fund their incubation or not, in a matter of weeks. And that has been extremely successful. Of course, SMEs and startups have felt like this was really a good way for them to get some cash relatively rapidly and efficiently. And at the same time, it fits our requirements, which is to really get new startups use Copernicus data as much as possible. The second lesson learned, I believe, is a matter of predictability. If you want SMEs to invest on the long run, you actually need to make clear that you're going to remain on that market for a long time and that you're going to ask for long-term contracts so that they can actually invest on their own side on the development of that product. I think that's actually something valid for large companies as well. And that's something that the Copernicus program is doing, because we have a 7-year planning environment, which means that all the actors in Europe know that Copernicus will be here for the next 7 years, and that the cash is going to continue running, and that the sentinels who are in orbit will continue to provide the data. And that level of predictability is extremely important.
Thank you, Thibaut. Lisa, let's say that similar to Airbus, Lockheed has a very long experience with SMEs. Can you explain something about your experience with respect to the involvement of SMEs in your programs?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say I probably echo a lot of what some of my colleagues have said here, and that I think we've all had similar experiences, but I might even tie it into the theme of the conference today, which is around diversity. And one of the things that I think is so vital about having SMEs as a part of our programs and a part of our business is that they are bringing a different perspective to the table. And they're generating new ideas. Those ideas could be around innovative technologies. Those ideas could be around different ways of doing things. And what we've been able to get from our SMEs on our programs is some of that different thinking and different ways of which to do things, which has actually made our business stronger and better because of it. And just like we talk about diversity in terms of 3G and other aspects of diversity improving business, I think having SMEs as a part of your team is also a business imperative because it brings your business to another level. I like to believe that we also help SMEs in return by doing that, by helping them to perhaps reinvent themselves or look at different ways to do things as well. I could give an example from Orion where we have almost 25% of the money that we get for the Orion program goes to small businesses in US terms. And those small businesses, in some cases, I've heard of stories where they've completely reinvented themselves, where they did something in a completely different industry, but because space challenges them from a technical perspective, they've added to that. Sometimes we partner with them for what the US government has small business initiatives, where we'll support them in a small business initiative, and they'll take a technology to a new level, and then we can leverage that once that technology is matured back into our products as well. So the government plays a role in helping them, we play a role in helping them, and they're also bringing themselves to a new level. So.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the role of the government. I think, let's say, in the States there are strict rules about the involvement of the small businesses, and let's say also other sectors. Do you find this constraining in one way or the other, or does it?
Yeah. So if you don't know, in the United States we do have rules and amounts of small business that have to get put into every program we have, but it's a little bit more complex than even that. In the United States, we have rules about types of small businesses. So we have small businesses that are women-owned, or small businesses that are small disadvantaged business, or veteran-owned, or in a hub zone. So there's a number of different categories, and our contracts actually have requirements in each of those categories. So that does sometimes pose a challenge to us, particularly if the program is a little bit more monolithic, maybe in one particular area. It's hard to distribute work across all those different categories. So one way which we've partnered with the US government on that's been very successful is we have a small business plan at the corporate level that has those same categories, and we're able to take credit at the corporate level as opposed to on a program by program basis, because sometimes each program doesn't lend itself to that. But over a year, we will meet those small or exceed those small business goals in all of those different categories across a variety of programs across Lockheed Martin.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Then we go to Matt. Matt, let's say you're an Australian SME, and what is the landscape for SMEs in Australia?
Yeah, the SME industry in Australia is really quite big. It accounts for more than 97% of businesses in Australia, and that employs over 40% of the working population. So that means that's a company below 20 people. A company that's got fewer than 200 people, it's about 2.5%. So that means there's less than 1% of the companies in Australia are bigger than 200 people. So it's a we're very, very biased towards the small end of town, basically. So the other thing, historically, Australia hasn't been very good at buying local. So they would typically buy something from Europe or the US instead of buying something from an Australian company. And kind of almost unashamedly, we didn't have duties when Boeing sold aircraft to us. There was no requirement to invest and that kind of thing. There were no offset credits and those sorts of things. So it never really, I guess, supported the industry. But recently there's been quite a change, and it's sort of, we've got an industry minister, a defence industry minister that is, which is a kind of a new portfolio. So it actually has a remit to support industry growth in Australia, just generally, not only SMEs. And I think that's seen a really big turnaround in the amount of development going on in Australia. And there's a particular emphasis on SMEs. So while there are primes in Australia, they have a large appetite to engage with SMEs, partly because I think the government's encouraging it, which obviously if they want to go after contracts, they need to get them, but also because it's an avenue for them to be more agile or more risky. It's easier for them to partner with an SME to do something that might be a little bit crazy and not sort of taint their brand, I think. So there's also that sort of angle that you can do really kind of out-of-the-box things a little bit more if you engage with a small company. So there's a lot of engagement in SMEs, and it's growing really well.
Yeah. So basically, let's say you would answer then my second question, which would have been why in the Australian context, why SMEs and why now? What is so relevant for?
Well, I think SMEs are agile and they innovative. I mean, just like Nicholas was sort of saying before about how they would put together a breadboard and have the first version of it, and the larger companies typically don't think that way. There's a whole lot of process you go through before you can deliver a prototype, whereas for SMEs, it's sort of less so. And I think that sort of promotes, I guess, more involvement in SMEs. There's also there's a lot of capital flowing into the SME market at the moment, and that's because there's a lot higher chance of a company being a unicorn. So the cash, obviously, is the cash venture capital is kind of attracted to that, which means there's a lot of money flowing into these sorts of businesses and propping them up, and there's more of them popping up all over the place. And another, I guess, opinion, this is my opinion, is that there's a lot more transparency. So, it's often considered that you want to engage with a large company because they got all the processes and they're kind of a reliable entity. But with respect, you only have to look at the banking industry. There's a big banking inquiry going on in Australia showing all sorts of processes are in place and all sorts of rules are being bent, and there's skeletons all over the closets and all sorts of things. So I think larger industries also enable you to hide things a lot easier. So I sort of feel that the SMEs are transparent, and that's also, I guess, appreciated just generally. Now there's also, I guess, there's an issue with risk management though. So being able to using the usual big stick over someone's wallet to make sure they deliver on something doesn't work very well for for SMEs because you only have to hit the wallet once and it's empty, right? So they need to come up with, I guess, a better way of being able to engage with SMEs to, I guess, to get them a proportion of the economy that, I guess, they represent.
Okay, let's say now you got the mic, Matt. Let's say now we go into the second part of the question. Let's say which is the intra-panel questions. So we have asked each panelist, let's say, to pick a preferred recipient of their question. And Matt, let's say, as you got the mic, let's say perhaps you start your first question too.
All right, I have a question for Eric. And as you know, we have a new space agency. And what advice do you have with regard to the SME community? Like, how can they engage more with the SME community, and what lessons could they have learned, basically?
Well, I remember last year at the AIC in Adelaide, really the announcement of the creation of the Australian Space Agency has been the buzz of during one full day. I remember this announcement, and with what you have just said, could you imagine a space agency that would implement the program without relying on 95% of the workforce? Because the figures you have given on the workforce represented by SMEs, in Europe SMEs go up to 250 staff, so that would really represent the bulk of the capacities in Australia. So for me, if there is one place where you should have a strong policy for SMEs, this is certainly Australia. Myself, as is, I would really looking forward to discuss with the authorities, to share with them what is working well in Europe. That is obvious.
Excellent, excellent, Erik. Let's say that as you got the mic.
Yes.
Let's say it's your turn.
Seth, I have a question for Ernst, because we have said the agencies, the European Union, all what we are doing for SMEs. So that is nice, but you know, normally in the street you have always two ways. So my question is, what are the SMEs doing to become the strong partners we need?
That's a fair question. Yes, and I think one very important part, what we bring in, is extremely personal risk and energy. So especially the owners, and I'm also owner and co-founder of my company, everything what I have is in the company. And if something happens with the company, it's done. It's personal risk for the benefit, I would say, yes, in space, we can say for the benefit of the globe, of the people. And this is sometimes underestimated, what we risk. This is, I would say, on top. There are 5 points, 5 to 6 points, which I shortly resume. So what we do and what we have to do is to make international partnerships, what also you want to have, also the European Commission want to have, for joint bidding. What we have to do is, once to be involved in the mission, we have to perform excellent work and in time. And this is the motivation by ourselves. Speed is one of the key words of success in these times. And we must bring in the speed, even if it is night shift or weekend shift and so on, and we can do it. And normally we want to do it. Then we shall never stop to be creative, flexible, cost efficient. It was said already today. We have to undertake continuous investments. This is what I mean with risk. In innovation and facilities. We have to do it, and we do it. We really do it. And we have to focus. Yes, it was said also, very important, to focus on specific products. And what we bring in is also, what we have to do is to attract new brains, young brains, full of ideas. We have to be attractive, cool, different, that the energy and the brains, I see here in the IAC a lot of young people, and they must bring in their energy. the spirit of the young people changes. They would like to be in small companies, and we, as owners, we must provide them the floor for it.
Ernst, don't put it down.
I'm on.
It's your turn.
It's for Nicolas, of course. Yes. You have presented some nice companies which you own, but in my sense, these are not SMEs. But my question is, especially for the space sector, yeah, with the long-term development cycles, yeah, we need, in my point of view, a healthy and reliable ecosystem. Ecosystem is, for me, the word, and we need a valuable balance between the LSI and the large companies, and SME and R&D. How can you, as LSI, contribute to foster the sustainability of the SME species within this ecosystem? And I mean SMEs, lower than 50 million, lower than 250 employees, independent, not owned by LSI.
Maybe there was a misunderstanding. The list of companies I mentioned, we are not shareholder of. And they are small and medium enterprises according to your standards, which are the one that we share. But irrespective of this, indeed, I think the ecosystem, or whatever you call it, the space biotop we are living in, it's complex, it's fragile, and it needs to be fostered. As any biotop on Earth, by the way, we know how fragile it is. So we try to do as best as we can, or as not bad as we can, just to try to sustain it. To foster and to sustain it. As said before, sustainability and long-term relationship is, for me, is extremely important. It's not cherry picking one day and then you go to the other one the day after. Long-term sustainability is important. But we do not do it because we are talking SMEs. We are not a charity. We foster it because the SME brings something. Because it brings something that we cannot find internally. It brings new capabilities, new technologies that we cannot find. We are not a charity. I think it's extremely important. And I wrote down what Sia said before, which I loved very much. Become indispensable partner. I think this is a very good way. And if you allow me, I think it should work both ways. SMEs should become indispensable partner for LSIs or big groups or whatever you call it, but it should work also the other way. We have to become indispensable partners for you guys, for you SMEs, wherever you are.
Nicolas? It's your turn.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I need to read the question we prepared. I mean, it's completely organized, this thing. Huh? Thibault, we wrote it yesterday. Yesterday we were discussing this European Commission recently contracted 5 teams to provide system, let's say, cloud-based systems to provide Copernicus data. I think it falls under the name DIAS. The interesting thing is that de facto European Commission, with the support of ESA, has selected 5 solutions which happen to be at least non-SMEs. I would not say LSIs, but non-SMEs. Whereas the goal is to make the whole set of Copernicus data, and maybe more data, by the way, available to all users, whether they're large corporations, whether they're SMEs, whether they're research institutes, whether they're labs, all over the place, which could not afford to have a large IT infrastructure, means archiving, means software development facilities and so forth, because it's simply too costly. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about this initiative, this model, and whether it could be replicated, and whether you consider, back to the subject of this roundtable, whether you consider this as a good tool to help the support of development of SMEs?
Perhaps a short answer, Thibault, because we're running a bit out of time.
Sure. So thanks, Nicolas. Indeed, I think the DIAS, our very good example of how we can support SMEs not only with money, but actually by putting at their disposal some interesting tools for the development of their business. So DIAS stands for Data and Information Access Service. These, as explained by Nicola, are 5 platforms which we set up to essentially distribute the Copernicus data to everyone. And it means that all our users now don't have to download the Copernicus archive. They can just go on this platform and process the data on the cloud on this platform. And of course, that's excellent for SMEs because that means they don't have to develop their own processing capability. They don't have to download the archive, and that saves a lot of money for them. And I think that's very much an interesting way, not only of working with industry, but in particular helping SMEs by lowering the barriers to entry for them to develop their business.
Thibault, your turn.
Yes, so my question was to Lisa. I think as a public program, we have a lot to learn from what the large system integrators are doing in their relation with SMEs and startups in particular. So my question is related to how, like, what type of partnerships do you develop with startups, and how do you make sure that your procurement are suitable to startups?
Thanks. So in the interest of time, I'll just name a few. So one of the initiatives that we have is working with our SME, small businesses and startups. We have a supplier conference. So we present a lot of our programs, a bit about our strategy and where we're going and where we see our technology needs. And that's a mechanism for us to start to plant the seeds within the small businesses and startups as to where we see things in the future and where they might be able to contribute to that. We also have a what we call a small business mentor protege program, and that's where we would work in partnership like a mentor would with a person, but with a company, where we help them, whether it's scaling to becoming a larger program or help them with processes or other things, and again, trying to improve their ability to scale and to be more supportive. And then the last thing I would say is that we partner with a lot of other large businesses or primes at times, whether that's through industry groups or others, where we'll compare notes in terms of what we're asking of our suppliers. And we usually find that we're asking the same thing, but we ask for it in a different way, or we ask for it in a different format. And so we try to work together with other primes to say, how can we ask them once for the same thing and we could all use it, as opposed to having SMEs do that multiple times. And so those are some examples.
Mm-hmm. Then the last question and the last word is then to an SME, let's say, which is very good for a conference like this. Lisa.
Hi, Matt. So my question for you is, last year at IAC, Australia announced a new space agency. So in a year's time, how has that impacted SMEs in Australia, and how could large primes like Lockheed Martin or others help you?
Yeah, well, it's been, I mean, the agency has actually only just started 3 months ago. I mean, it was announced and they only opened the doors 3 months ago, but here we are just 3 months later and we're on the first Australian Space Agency stand, you know, a whole lot of companies all together. So I think it's a massive step forward, and it's been moving very fast. They're obviously running around the country crazily trying to work out what everybody wants to do. So there's a lot to unfold still, but it's been really good for us. To basically have the visibility and an agency behind us. I guess in the context of the question about the primes, I think the main thing we're interested in is how to better engage with the SMEs in relation to risk. I think it's a particular problem in Australia because what ends up happening is, instead of engaging directly with an SME, they engage via a prime just for the risk, for no other reason other than from the risk point of view. And I think that's I mean, it's great to partner with the primes, but I think that adds a lot of, or takes away a lot of the value that you get out of an SME. So, I mean, I would like to, you know, to discuss with primes, or to come up with a better model for engaging smaller companies with a different risk profile. I guess it's not necessarily a bad risk profile; it's just a different one, and we just got to work out, you know, how we can work together. And I mean, the ultimate goal, of course, is to get on your and Nicholas's supply chains, basically. So anything that you guys can do supporting that sort of thing would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that it has been a very informative and useful panel discussion. I would like to invite, let's say, the panelists to say in one sentence what should be really the takeaway. And why don't we structure it like this, that we first have got the two views from the public sector, then the two views from the LSIs, and then we end up with the two views from the SMEs. So, Erik, could I ask you, let's say, to mention which is the key thing which we should take away from this discussion, having heard the various perspectives?
What is impressive for me is that you had today 4 continents that were presenting their policy for SMEs on one side of the table or the other side, and I'm really impressed by the convergence. So I think that this is not a matter for Europe, it is really a policy that is established on the world basis.
Yep. Thibault?
Yeah, as a public organization, indeed, the main takeaway for ourselves would be that to work with SME, keep it simple and predictable.
Okay. Then perhaps Lisa?
You know, one of the things that I heard throughout the panel is how important communications is. So if I look at it from a prime to an SME, or an SME to a prime, or a prime to public organization, it's really important to understand each other's perspectives. And I know as a prime, we may ask for stupid things, and it's always great when the SME comes back and says, you know what, that's really stupid, and here's why, and I understand that perspective better. Or I ask for something, and I have to explain why I need it, and they didn't have that bigger context. So, communications.
Nicolas?
Yeah, just back to the expression of biotop ecosystem that we use. The space sector, as any other industrial sector, has to live in harmony with a balanced mix of species, each of them being necessary in the food chain for the other one. You have LSIs, you have SMEs, and so forth. Take an example. You do 2 miles away from here, you end up around a pond in the middle of Bremen countryside. You will find algae, fishes, frogs, insects, whatever you call it. Everything is fine until the temperature increases or decreases, or you have a massive rush of pollutants, or you have a drought. Some species will survive a bit longer than the other one, but eventually everybody will die. Let's say, lose-lose situation like this one is not exactly what we are expecting as an LSI. I suspect nobody around this table is expecting either. So we are in a pond, and we live together, and we continue to do so.
Okay. Matt?
First. Cool. I think the one thing that I take away from this is there seems to be a lot of it's a well-understood problem, and everybody wants to engage. You know, the primes, everybody understands engaging with SMEs is a good thing, and they have an appetite, I guess, to support it. And just to be the standard SME-type response, let's just do it faster.
Okay, let's say then I think the last word is then for Ernst. Let's say that as we are in Germany, let's say you're the president of the German SME Association, so I think it is very important that you close this panel with your remarks on the main takeaways from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much for this honor. I'm very much pleased that we could have this very nice panel with very nice and good input and output. And my final conclusion would be, please, let's join, let's talk. So SME to OHB, to Airbus, to Thales, let's talk. Let's find ways how we can achieve a balanced, sustainable ecosystem, balanced, with courage and trust. Courage is lost by some people. You are the people with courage. Please take the courage and trust to us, and let's increase the share of SME in missions, in institutional missions, in commercial missions, for the benefit of us all. Yeah? It must not be a target of 25% like Lisa presented, but something like 10 to 15% for the whole mission would be good. Thank you very much for your also attendance for the sake of SME and for the ecosystem.
Yep. I would like to thank the panel wholeheartedly, let's say, for their preparation and the participation. What we've done last year is to have a post-conference report, let's say, with all the the main facts. Let's say we've done this for Adelaide, and we would like to also to do this for this session. So once again, thanks very much. Similar to last year, we've got 10 seconds left, so we were spot on target. I think, let's say, this is very much appreciated. So thank you all in the audience, let's say, for this panel discussion, and thanks again to the panelists.